Well, welcome to Lesson 3. I'm Jack Gately, your instructor and owner of the Real Estate School and owner of Jack Gately Real Estate. And Lesson 3 is all going to be about property conditions and disclosures. So, very, very important topic in the real estate business relative to our ethical obligations to everyone. Disclosures. Property conditions and disclosures. That's what our lesson 3 is all about. So let's get into it. It's a very much more of a conceptual discussion than, say, hard math or that type of thing. But when we're talking about property disclosures, many states in the country, not Massachusetts, but many states require the seller to fill out a property condition disclosure. Gonna run out of room there. Statement. Oh my gosh. Does that seem like a long thing? It does. In fact, in some states, it can be like 4 or 5 pages of extremely detailed questions that the seller, even of a normal single-family home, has to fill out. And it basically, to kind of put a summary on it, it puts the seller on the hook for anything that is wrong with the property, and the buyer can go back to the seller and say, hey, you misrepresented the property in one way or the other. I won't dare draw a fish there, but you get the idea. The seller is on the hook for how the property is represented. In many states, you have to fill out a property disclosure statement. Now, that's the requirement. It is possible that the buyer might ask for a property disclosure statement. Oh, isn't that a funny looking line that just came up here? Let's see if we can erase that actually. There we go, almost. Sometimes the buyer may ask the seller to fill it out, but unless it's a condition of the offer, for instance, or the P&S later on, more likely it would come in the offer stage. But unless it is a requirement of the offer or the P&S, the seller in Massachusetts does not need to fill out this detailed form, which puts them on the hook for the whole situation. Nope, in Massachusetts, we are what we call a caveat emptor. Oh, I think we're missing an E in here. EA, there we go. Emptor. Caveat emptor state. And that is a state in which we have the buyer beware state. A buyer beware. So, in other words, the seller is putting the house on the market, or the property. We'll just continue to use the analogy of a house. And they're saying, hey, buyer, why don't you check into what's wrong with the property, if anything at all, and you, the buyer, can investigate how you want to take, if you want to buy the property. I'm offering it. Here it is. I will give you, usually in Massachusetts, it's a 10-day inspection window. I'll give you 10 days to send your home inspector over here, for instance, and give it the once over twice. Not a problem. But as far as me, the seller, representing what's right or what's wrong with the property, nope. That's something that you can investigate. And I'll give you access to the property at pretty much any time you want within reasonable business hours. But it's on you with your licensed home inspector to check it out. One big exemption on that, and that is lead paint, which we're going to talk about later in further detail. But if the seller has knowledge of lead paint, they must disclose it. This caveat emptor rule does not apply to lead paint. You must disclose lead paint if you know about it, if the seller knows about it. So in that regard, while the seller doesn't have to record anything, disclose anything. So the seller does not face, how should we say, an affirmative obligation to disclose. They can't mislead. They can't lie. They can't lie about something. So while they don't need to go out of their way to say that the roof leaks, if they're asked a direct question, hey, does the roof leak? Then they must say the truth, that the roof does leak. Or at the very least, they can't just blatantly say, no, the roof doesn't leak. Meanwhile, like the raindrops are falling on their head. No, you can't do that. So you can't go out and outright lie about something when faced with the direct question as a seller. However, you don't have an affirmative obligation. You don't have to kind of go out of your way, so to speak, to disclose what we sometimes call as a red flag issue, Oh, if there's ever time where something should be written in red, it would be red flag issue. So let's write it in red. A red flag issue, often referred to in Massachusetts as a material fact. A material fact, or a red flag issue, it was going to be something that would otherwise convince you to make a different decision on the property. So it's something that's highly likely to affect the decision of whether or not you want to buy it or not. So it's hey, the basement floods, the roof leaks, that type of information, big impact on whether or not you'd actually want to buy it. Now, some things that are that are going to fall into this category of what you want to disclose come in two different groups, really. One is related to the property, and the other one is related to stuff that would be external to the property. And before we go much farther, I want to make sure that we have a general understanding of the real estate agent's obligation in these particular cases. So we do have certain things that you must disclose if you know about them. And certainly from a seller's point of view, in Massachusetts, we don't have an affirmative obligation to disclose, but you are a professional in the basis. And so in the agency, in the business, I should say, forgive me, a little stumble there. So you have a heightened duty to disclose things. So I always like to use the rule, when in doubt, disclose. If you're not sure, should I say this? You always want to disclose it. So that's the rule I use. When in doubt, disclose. It's better to have said something about it or written it in the listing, for instance, than find out later that you should have. And we're going to go over in just a few minutes here about what actually are we talking about with these what about the property and what about the external segments that we need to disclose? Very, very important. What are we talking about? So keep in mind that in some states you actually have to do a written disclosure statement. Sometimes they'll fortunately abbreviate that a little bit to say the disclosure statement. Now, since we're talking about the disclosure statement, there are some buyer's agents, as I mentioned, that request them here in Massachusetts, but not always. You do always have to disclose the lead paint. So what are we actually talking about? What are we required to disclose? So as I mentioned, the number of things that you need to disclose, they fall into two different categories. The first category is the property disclosures, stuff that you have to disclose about the property itself, property disclosures. Let me stop right here. I want to interject more of a personal observation. Because as a real estate agent, you may have only been at the house once or twice before you actually hit the button and put the listing on live on the MLS. Maybe you've been there 3 or 4 times, but that is never a substitute for actually living there, sleeping there for months or years. Obviously, you live in your home, you get used to it, and you've learned about things about your home that you didn't know when you first looked at it originally. Sometimes those are good things, and sometimes those are not so good things. But over time, from living there, you know stuff. And when we talked about these material facts earlier that we're discussing now, you as a real estate agent need to disclose those material facts. Remember, when in doubt, disclose, even if the seller doesn't want you to disclose them. So you can't hide them at their request. Unfortunately, some sellers catch on to that and they stop telling you about the property. And unfortunately, even on top of that, to make it even worse, some real estate agents will say something like, hey, everything that you tell me that's wrong with the property, I am under an affirmative obligation to disclose. Hint, hint, wink, wink, stop telling me all the things that are wrong with your house. Otherwise, I'll need to disclose it to some sellers. I find that it kind of, inherently unethical, but it does exist as a phenomenon out there. So I wanted to let you know that as we started to discuss these 2 broad categories about what you need to disclose. And the first one is the property disclosures. So when we're talking about property disclosures, you have to disclose the instability of any landfill, whether it's going to be earthquake zone or flood zone. Since we mentioned flood, we'll probably mention that in a different part of the class, but FEMA has redrawn the flood maps in response to Hurricane Sandy and other natural disasters. Your obligation, of course, would be to provide an updated flood map. Ooh, gosh, does that sound like a test question? So just keep that in mind. Anything to do with the groundwater, anything that could be a pollution, so to speak, that would be either trigger the CERCLA, which is the federal law overseen by the EPA, the Comprehensive Environmental Response, Compensation, and Liability Act. Ooh, what a mouthful. We'll get to that later. But anything that triggers CERCLA, or 21E here in Massachusetts. We'll get to that one too later. But environmental stuff, pollution in the property. So the next thing we want to talk about is lot size. Hey, if you have a lot size, report it properly on your listing. So easy to do. If you can't get the information on the internet, which you probably will be able to get through your MLS with the click of a button, you just hit the public document link. If you can't do that, head down to the local town hall or whatever, pick up the field card at the assessor's office, and they'll get you the lot size. They'll have a bunch of other information too that you'll need to fill out and complete your listing. Encroachments. If you know that the neighbor's shed is actually over the property line, then you need to disclose it. Easements. Any type of easement involved, that's a fairly easy one. You should disclose that. What's the most common utility easement? Most common easement? That's probably a utilities easement. We also have drainage easements. We got all sorts of easements. Shared driveway, all those types of things fall under easements. I have a whole section in the class about easements if you haven't taken it yet. Pests and mold, got to disclose those. That's fairly easy. All right, so structural. If you know that something's wrong with the basement or the roof or the timbers or whatever, you must disclose it. Same thing if you know it's wrong with the systems, electrical, plumbing, heating, whatever it happens to be. And sometimes when you have to fill out the disclosure form that we talked about earlier that you have to do in some states, you also have to certify from a seller's perspective that all work was done with a valid permit issued by the local municipality. That's a requirement in many disclosures. And also sometimes you're going to see that even though we don't use that in Massachusetts, the disclosure form, sometimes you'll see that requirement written into the P&S, especially if the buyers have an attorney. Usually they're going to get a P&S, usually the standard P&S. The seller's attorney may add on an addendum, and then if the buyers have an addendum, sometimes the buyers add in this section that says that sellers have to certify that all work done since construction was done by permit. So the last one here that we have to disclose, of course, is, and this is a fairly straightforward one, should there be anything wrong with the location? Is it somehow in some type of hazard zone or something like that? That you have to disclose that. That's fairly straightforward. So these are the property disclosures that you'd need to make. There's a lot of stuff there. Basically just fall under anything that's wrong with the property itself, along with the nuts and bolts, so to speak, of the property. You need to disclose it. It's fairly straightforward. Okay, so the next category of things that you must disclose are external conditions like zoning and planning. In fact, after we do this lesson, I want to talk about a particular case relative to the disclosing of zoning. Fascinating case that we've had in Massachusetts in the last 3 or 4 years with the property. I believe it was in Norwell, Massachusetts. We'll get to that in a few minutes. But anything to do with zoning or planning, because here in Massachusetts, where our land use is highly regulated, these information has a direct impact on value. So you're going to need this information, by the way, before you can fill out your MLS listing. They're going to ask you what zone it's in. And if you don't know, it's fairly easy to find out. Again, you can just click on the public record button on the MLS, or worst case, go down to your town hall or your local municipal building and look this up. Fairly easy. Also, you can get your school zones. If you don't know your school zone, hey, that's something that you should be doing as a real estate agent, finding out what school zone the property is in for almost every single listing. If it's a residential listing, the school zone it's going to be in. Hey, people are going to ask you. You might as well find out sooner rather than later what tax district it's going to be in. So this has a very interesting implication. There are some varying tax districts, overlay tax districts, business improvement districts. Y'all have to disclose that. That should be part of your listing, written right up in advance. Noise. So that's a tough one, because it is a little bit subjective. But if something's near the highway, for instance, or if there's planes, for instance, so that's something that you should disclose within reason. All of these things, everything that we talk about in real estate class really is within reason, of course. Taxes. Once again, you're going to need that information in order to fill out your MLS listing. Assessments. Assessments are for special improvements known as betterments in the direct area of the property. You're going to need to include that, and any other type of miscellaneous lien. There can be some rather oddball liens out there. You might have to disclose that too, aside from what would come out in a normal title search. The next one here is illegal dumping. If there's any type of possible hazard from illegal dumping, you've got to disclose that as well. That kind of speaks for itself in the neighboring properties. If you are aware of it, if you're not aware of it, then you're not obliged to disclose it, of course. In crime, when it always comes up when we talk about crime, we come up and we talk about sex offenders. And in many states in the country, not all states, but in many states in the country, we have a law called Megan's Law. Megan's Law. So let's write that down for a quick second and talk about crime. I get this question about crime. Let's go with yellow here. Hold on a second, folks. Let's go with yellow. I get this question about crime all the time. I rent a fair number of apartments, and people ask, especially since they're coming to Boston from other parts of the country and other parts of the world, is it safe? Hey, is Beacon Hill safe? Beacon Hill. All right. So your perception of Beacon Hill, of whether it's safe or not, is probably, I'm just going to go out on a limb, and you're going to probably say it's safe. But little do most people know that I'm pretty sure that Beacon Hill, from a police district point of view, also includes Boston Common. And on Boston Common, there's a lot of crime. See, there I go. There's some crime that's probably a little bit higher than on the normal streets of Beacon Hill, and therefore Beacon Hill crime rates might actually be a little bit higher than you'd expect them to be. So there you go. You shouldn't be recommending things about safety, because I know a neighborhood that I go to all the time, and some people are going to consider that neighborhood to be unsafe. I'm completely safe there. I'm actually from there. But for some people, they would consider it to be unsafe. So safety is in the mind or the eye of the beholder. What you should do is you should refer. You should refer your potential buyers, your potential renters, out to the professionals. So who are the pros when it comes to crime? They're going to send them to the local cops, right? So the police department has the local information on crime rates. You can get all sorts of things off the internet. But you, as the real estate agent with the heightened duty not to stigmatize any particular neighborhood, you should not say, ooh, that's dangerous. Ooh, that's safe. You shouldn't do that. And of course, in many states, we also have a sex offender registry. And our state's called the Sex Offender Registry Board, the SORB. And you can go to most local police departments and find out whether or not a particular neighborhood is safe or not. So have the professionals handle it. You refer them out to the professionals. Don't say, ooh, that neighborhood's safe, that neighborhood is not safe. Now, what about sex offenders? Since we just mentioned the Sex Offender Registry Board, that's a good one. In most instances, you do not have the affirmative obligation to go track down where the sex offenders live. That's not your job. Instead, your job is going to require you to refer the public, again, to the local police that have this information. So very, very important rules on safety. You get asked that all the time. From sometimes when you're a real estate agent, and there are other topics as well, which we'll talk about in a few minutes, but sometimes when you're a real estate agent, well, you get asked questions that you'd like to answer, but you can't. Because from either a historical perspective where real estate agents have how should we say this, stigmatized a neighborhood, I guess that's the best way to say it, or made an overarching statements which are unfair to certain neighborhoods. We shouldn't do that. And also, whether it's about, hey, can you tell me where the polka dotted people live? Well, you can't do that. There's fair housing prohibitions against that. So sometimes when I'm getting multiple questions that I'm not able to answer, I find there are a lot of real estate agents that just give you these kind of non-answer answers, which are very off-putting to the general public. I'd rather look my clients in the eye, or my potential renter, my potential buyer, and say, hey, listen, I know it sounds a little funny, but there's some things as a real estate professional, I can't say. So I know it sounds a little funny, but one of those things is safety, and as we talked about, so we'll just put safety there. But as a professional, there's some things I can't say. I know it sounds weird, and if I was just sitting here at the coffee shop, for instance, chatting with you because you were my buddy or somebody I just recently met, of course I could tell you. But since we're in this client relationship, or this relationship with a member of the general public inquiring about a property, we are, again, at a heightened standard for our behavior, and there's just some things that I can't talk about. I know it sounds silly, but in the end, it's there. That law is there so that you, the consumer, make sure that you get the accurate information from the appropriate authorities, and don't base your decision upon my preconceptions of what may be safe, for instance, or where the polka-dotted people live, because I could be wrong about that. Polka-dotted people do move around, so I don't dare draw. I'm tempted to draw a polka-dotted person right here. I don't think I will, but you get the idea. So sometimes you just can't answer it, and I just find it so much better just to kind of say, look at my clients and say, hey, listen, I'd love to answer that question for you, but I really can't because I'm in this professional capacity. You're a pro. You're going to be a pro now. You're not just, how should we, chit-chatting, I should say, with somebody that you met on the street or at a bar or at the school bus stop or something like that. Now you have a heightened responsibility. And while we were talking about disclosures, there are some things that you can't say. So let's talk a little bit about another important topic, and that's your basically 3 types of info that you can say, never say, and you only say if asked. So what can you disclose? Let's take a look at some 3 types of info that you have to answer in different manners. So with information like material facts of the property, known material facts about the property, you must disclose them. Now, important, sounds like a test question and very important for real life. You can't withhold a material fact at the request of the seller. At the request of the seller. Not allowed. You cannot withhold a material fact at the request of the seller. That is a no. You might say, well, wait a second, isn't the seller our client since we represent the seller? Yes, but when it becomes material facts about the property, you must disclose them. And remember, sometimes we call material facts red flag issues in other parts of the country. We tend to say material facts. Nonetheless, you can never disclose. You must disclose them, even if the seller asks them to keep it your little secret. Like you're going through the house and a raindrop hits you on the head, and you wipe it off your head. And if you're like me, you don't have much hair, and it's pretty obvious it's dripping down your head. It doesn't just blend into your hair. And the seller sees you wipe it off your head, and the seller says, ooh, the roof leaks. Please don't tell anybody. Oh, no, that's a no-no. I have to tell someone. So those are the types of things that fall into what you must disclose. Okay, so what you never, ever disclose, I think I might actually use a second page for this in a second, but what you never disclose are things that are not material to the listing. And I see this happen all the time with real estate agents, unfortunately. Things not material to the listing. I wondered if you can think about what's not material to the listing. I'm going to give you a couple of things that I see all the time. Why they're selling. Why selling. What they'll take. What they'll take for money. You'll get these questions all the time. Now, let's take the first one. Sometimes you'll get these from other real estate agents, unfortunately, who should know better and not even bother asking this question, because they should know that they're asking you to violate an important doctrine. But occasionally you'll get it from members of the general public as well. Hey, why they're selling? Now, some people can ask that question relatively naively, but sometimes if it comes from a real estate agent or a sophisticated buyer, they are probably asking that for a very precise reason. And the reason why they're asking is they want some leverage. They're looking for some leverage here in order to get a better negotiating position. They're looking for some leverage, right? They're looking to pry this deal open and get a better deal for themselves. So why they're selling. You do have agents all the time answer this incorrectly. One of the tamest answers, for instance, that I've heard out there, and this sounds tame, but it is wrong to answer it this way, is, hey, they're selling because little Johnny and little Susie have grown up and they're off to college, and the house it's just too big now. And there's the yard is too big, and they want to downsize, and they are empty nesters. And you hear all this from real estate agents all the time, unfortunately, and you really shouldn't be hearing it. So why they're selling is not relevant. Why they're selling is not relevant to the process. And most people, unless they're completely naive, they're asking this to get some leverage. I like to answer this with a non-answer answer. I like to say something like they've decided to move on. And then occasionally you will get other professionals in the business. They'll ask you, like, not once, not twice. They'll ask you like 3 times. At which point, you got to ask yourself, are they not aware of this rule? And sometimes I'll just say they're selling because they're selling. The only thing really matters is, hey, are you going to make us an offer? Are you going to make us an offer? So eventually, I might get a little bit angry if someone asks me this question 3 or 4 times, because it's not relevant. It's not a material fact. It's the motivation. The motivation. Now, I tell you, you see that that word all the time. Motivated seller. Sometimes capitalized right in the listing description. This is basically saying, hey, we have it listed at $200,000, but best offer. I suppose that's okay if the seller is aware of that language and ahead of time, but pretty much anyone is motivated that's gone to the hassle of or a procedure of listing their property. So I never like to look at that. I prefer that they don't use that language, but people say motivated seller. It's basically code for saying, hey, make me an offer, which gets us to our next point is, hey, what are they going to take? What would take to move? In fact, there's a new website, I think it's out there, called Make Me Move or something like that. Make Me Move, something like that. Is people put their houses on the market and say, make me an offer I can't refuse, right? That's basically what it means. Now, if you're listing a house and you're there at the showing and someone comes up to you and they're doing the showing and they'll say, hey, what do you think they'll take? As if it's a used car in a driveway that you're buying out of someone's driveway. Hey, you can't answer that. Well, I think the best appropriate answer for that, by the way, is something along these lines. I think you should make your highest and best qualified offer. Highest and best qualified offer. And I'll take it to my clients forthwith. If you say something along the lines like, well, it's on for $350, but they'll take an offer, you're immediately weakening your own seller's position. And that can go down a very, very, very slippery slope, because you might think, hey, maybe I can get them to send in an offer for $320 or something like that, and I can sell this house for $320. And when you do, of course, you're going to make a commission. But in the end, if you hadn't kind of couched it like that, you may have been able to entice an offer out of them like at $340 if you said what I said, which is, please make your highest and best qualified offer. Occasionally, you'll get somebody to ask you 1 or 2 or 3 times this exact same question. It's incredibly annoying, and it does happen. And you'll get them to, and eventually you have to say, what's the right answer? The right answer at that point, when they've kind of rubbed you the wrong way, is, I know they'll take list price or higher. Kind of send them the message, stop asking me the question. Unfortunately, people ask these questions all the time, and it's inappropriate. If it's members of the general public, they might not know better, but other real estate professionals they'll ask, then they should know better. Now, and if they do know better, they're just saying they're seeing what they can get out of you. What type of information can they solicit from you? And I guess that's bad form, but it does happen. Now, on the flip side of this, you do have real estate agents that start telling why they're selling or what they'll take, and this violates one of our fiduciary responsibilities that we'll talk about later, called the fiduciary responsibility of confidentiality. But sometimes, heaven forbid, if the listing is getting a little old in the tooth and it might be coming towards the expiration date, sometimes the listing agent might talk to the buyer's agent or talk to some members of the public that are viewing the property and start spewing off all sorts of information about the seller and why they're desperate to sell. For instance, they need to move to Ohio or to get a job transfer, or they're getting divorced. Oh, you see that one a lot. Or they're getting I don't know, they have a health issue, and all of a sudden you see from the seller's perspective, the seller's agent dumping all this information. It's basically a giant data dump from the seller's agent onto the potential buyers, and it's giving them, those buyers, information to make a better offer for. And this is unethical, absolutely unethical, but you absolutely do see it out there. So I just want to let you know about those particular two things that you must disclose and must not disclose, which brings us to our third thing, where you only disclose it if asked. If asked. So in this category here, we call it stigmatized property. Stigmatized property. I'm going to write that on the book. It's probably something that you want to have written in your notes for today's lesson too. Stigmatized property. There we go. Gosh golly, got that one wrong. As you know, I can't spell, so we're going to get that right for you. There's a Z in there. Yep, there's the Z. Oh, I see what we did. Look at, no, we had it right. We had it right. Then we're just missing the D. There we go. Gosh, I am human. So even though, yeah, I know. So stigmatized property. Only disclose it if asked. So what are these types of things? It usually involves some type of event. That happened in the past. It's over with. It doesn't have to do with the beams or the floor or the property line or anything like that. It's over with. It happened somewhere way back in the past, or maybe not even it could have been in the recent past, but it happened. It's over. And do you disclose it? Well, no, you don't disclose it unless you're asked about it. So if the house, for instance, was known for, let's just say, a past drug activity. So if it was known for past drug activity, that was an event that occurred in the past, do you disclose it? No, you don't. Until the buyer says, was there drug activity? This is a speech bubble, if you didn't know. Drug activity here before? And once they ask you that, then you must disclose it. Why? Well, the thing about a stigma is that it gets to wear off in time. Over time, it fades away. Your job is not to perpetuate the stigma. Your job is to let it fade away over time so that the property can regain its full value and not to handicap the seller. So one way around this, of course, from a buyer's perspective, is to ask a blanket question. For instance, do you have any stigmatized property disclosures to make to me at this time? You can ask a broad question like that. and see what they have to say. Now, most properties do not have a stigma attached to them, but this is a good test question, and you should definitely see it on the exam, and you should be aware that, from a practice point of view, you're not supposed to disclose things that are events that occurred in the past. Now, it's important to note that a stigma can sometimes become a how should we say this, a positive. And we have from a marketing point of view, this is, of course, but we have a property here in Massachusetts that is the site of another event. It was a double murder in Fall River back in the late 1800s, approximately 1890s-ish. If I remember correctly, and it's a young woman named Lizzie Borden, and unfortunately she killed her parents in the home in Fall River. And nowadays I believe, you could double check this for me, but I believe now the property has churned the stigma around, and it's actually a highlight of the house. Last I heard, it's been a couple of years now, it's no longer a stigma, it's actually a positive, and it's kind of like a bed and breakfast type of thing. But it really is the site of a double murder. So we think Lizzie Borden did it, although she was acquitted of the crime at the time. Yeah, I always thought she was convicted, but actually she was acquitted of the crime. You can go sleep in her house if you want. Obviously, if that occurred and it was your listing, that would be a stigma which you would need to disclose, but only if asked. Which leads us to our last category when we talk about stigma, and we should never be a stigma, and that's AIDS. Okay, AIDS, HIV status is not a stigma and should not be disclosed even if asked. So that's an important rule for real life. So AIDS, HIV status of the seller, even if there was a death at the property, is not disclosable even if asked. It is not a stigma, and that's the law. So along these lines about disclosing things that you have to mention, let's just talk about over mentioning things, and that's called puffing it up. Puffing it up. You can't oversell it. There's a coffee shop near me. I don't happen to drink coffee. Never had a cup of coffee, actually, that says best coffee in town. I know some of you are still stuck on the whole no coffee concept, but I haven't. Best coffee in town. You really can't say that about your listing. You shouldn't say that about your listing. That's wrong. It's subjective. Obviously, this particular coffee shop thinks they have the best coffee in town, but other people may differ. It's really subjective. I see this the most often when it comes to water view. Water view. And there'll be this tiny little dot off in the distance, and then they'll say that's a water view. And they'll make you go up to the roof, bring your binoculars, and way off into the distance will be this little dot of ocean or sliver of ocean like that, or bay or harbor or whatever it happens to be, and they'll say it's water view when it really isn't water view. So you see that from of course water view is subjective, I guess, but don't oversell it is the name of the game. Don't oversell it. Don't say that your kitchen is the best kitchen in town. Fill in the blank however you want to do that. Don't oversell it. Don't puff it up. Other things that you should be mindful about disclosing are offers. I prefer to get instruction from my seller. Usually as part of my listing agreement, I use a form that has 3 boxes on it, and these boxes allow me or give me some guidance about what I can say about any particular offers that have been submitted. So if I have this right, the first box allows me to talk about the offers to the members of the general public and to other agents and whatnot. and tell people how much they're for. The next box allows me to tell about offers, but I'm not allowed to say how much they're for. So that's that one. And the last one is offers and, of course, money. And this one allows me to say, I can't tell you about the offers that I have, and I can't tell you how much there are, obviously. So I prefer to operate under this one here, this option. I can tell people about the offers, but I can't tell them how much they're worth. So this gives me the greatest leverage when I'm speaking to a potential buyer. For instance, if I had a open house on a Saturday and some people are interested in it, but they don't put an offer in, and then I show it on Sunday and get an offer on Sunday. Open house was Saturday. Okay, so I'm going to send the offer over to my seller forthwith, right away. I'm going to send it over to them right away. But I'm still going to go back to my people that saw the open house either on Sunday or no later than Monday, and I'm going to say, hey, we got an offer. If you want to put an offer in, now is the time. And I can do this because I've gotten some guidance from my seller by checking this box as part of the listing agreement, that I can go out and tell other people that seemed interested, hey, now's the time. And of course, by doing that, then we're going to be getting multi-offers or multiple offers, and therefore you might be able to get a better price for your client. You might even be able to sell it over listing, which is a a thing, sometimes of a marketing thing here, when you sell something over listing. That's a little bit misleading occasionally, because sometimes people list the house right at where it should be sold at, or even a teeny bit lower, so that they can later go back and say in their marketing materials, ooh, I sold it over listing. This year, I had a house on the market. What was that house? It was for $379,900, and I sold it for $380,000. I sold it for over listing, a whole $100 over listing. But I guess that's that's the game people play. What they don't tell you is occasionally they'll mark it way down. So they'll mark it at 370. They'll want 380, but they'll mark it at 375 or something like that. And then when it sells for more than 375. Then they can say they sold it for over listing. They can pat themselves in the back, and so you occasionally see that from time to time. So that's the guidance for offers. Also, when we're talking about things to disclose, let's talk about financial interest. So very, very important financial interest. If you, as the listing agent, there we go, have an interest in the property, you must disclose it. Or if your family member has an interest in the property, you must disclose it. Or if your business partner has a interest in the property, you must disclose it. Hey, you're doing business out there. These are the important things that you must disclose. Does anybody really care that a real estate agent also happens to be the person selling the house, for instance, or selling the property, for instance? Nobody really cares, and so it's not going to stop you or hinder the marketing efforts of the property in any way, shape, or form. But when it's not disclosed, then you start to wonder, why did they keep it a secret? And so it's a very easy thing to disclose the fact that, especially the listing agent or any of these three things exist, because right in the MLS there's a spot where you have property disclosures. And the most common one that I see is that agent is owner. Agent is owner. And so once you see that, you know that the agent is the owner. So it also means that you're talking directly to the owner. You're not talking through their list agent. You're talking directly with the owner. And if you're talking directly with the owner who also is the agent, then you might handle that in just a little bit different fashion. Keep that in mind, that you're going to see that disclosure from time to time. Not a lot of time, but from time to time you will see it. Let's go back to the overarching message of this particular section, and that's when in doubt, disclose. When in doubt, disclose. So if you're in doubt, disclose. Very, very easy. Very, very easy. When in doubt, disclose, except when it comes to things that are not relevant to the property. So there are we'll call it non-material facts. And of course we talked about stigma at length too, so you know when that occurs. But when in doubt, disclose for everything else, and you're always going to disclose, even if your state does not require a property condition statement, you're always going to disclose lead paint. I've hinted at this a couple of times, and I just want to go over it real quick here. The duty to disclose zoning, since I mentioned it earlier, especially when I mentioned earlier, it's so easy to find this information out. You could go down to the town hall, but for most of you, you'll just get this information by accessing the field card by clicking a button inside the MLS. It's something that you'll probably do every single time you put a property on the market. You're going to have to include the zoning, which, as we learned earlier, is one of the important facts that you do need to disclose. So in this noteworthy case, DeWolf versus Hingham Center Limited, the Supreme Judicial Court, which is the highest court in in Massachusetts, ruled that a listing agent had the duty to disclose zoning, and the case worked like this. A piece of property was put on the market by a listing agent, and the listing agent got some information from the seller. And without double checking it, the listing agent ran with that information. And the information in particular was that it was in a business district, not a residential district, and that can make all the world of difference if you want to put a business in the piece of property. And the buyer that came along wanted to put a hair salon in the business. So in this particular case, they bought the property based upon the fact that in the MLS listing and in marketing materials provided by the listing agent, it was mentioned that a hair salon would be approved. It would be in the right zone. They also mentioned the name of the zone. I think it was called Business B, and they said that the property was in a Business B district, which would allow for hair salon to be sited at that location. The hair salon, the property, however, was not in a Business B district. It was in, I guess, residential district, and they were denied their business permit at the property. But that only happened after they bought it, so they sued. Can you imagine heading down to the town hall to get your business permit, and you're standing there at the desk at the building department or wherever, and they're looking up your property, and they look back at you and say, "Hey, did you just buy this place?" And you say, "Yes." And they say, "Well, we got some bad news for you. It's residential. You can't put a hair salon in there." Can you imagine how infuriated you might be? And that obviously I don't know exactly the circumstances, but I'm imagining something along those lines happening. And they sued under a law, which we'll mention a couple of other times during class, but I just figure we'll mention it here. They sued under a law, under Massachusetts law, Chapter 93A, which is a consumer protection statute for misrepresentation. Because while the listing agent said, "Hey, I just did what the seller told me to do. I took their information and I went with it." The simple fact of the matter, it was deemed that the listing agent had a reasonable responsibility to double check that information. So the moral of the story from listing agents is to not trust your sellers when they tell you about zoning. I guess that's the unpolished version of it. But let's just take another example of it. If your seller tells you that the property has beach rights, you better double check that. If the seller tells you it can be a hair salon because it's a business district, you better double check that. So do your job. If you're like that New England Patriots phrase, do your job. That's a very important way to go when it comes to these types of things. And this is a famous case, DeWolf versus Hingham. I don't think it's on the exam itself, but it's an important concept for you to know, because I think the concept is definitely on the exam. And a famous case, relatively newer here in Massachusetts, last couple of years. I want to recommend to you a website that I think is just invaluable. An attorney runs it. I don't actually know this attorney. I can only tell you that I'm a fan of his work. It's the Massachusetts, Mass Real Estate Law blog. Again, I don't even know this guy. I only read his work. I subscribe to his once a week emails that he sends out. I believe his name, I'll just mention his name here for you. I don't have it here handy. I don't think I have it here handy. I believe his name is Richard Vetstein or Vetstein. I'm not exactly even how to pronounce it. Let's see if I can find it here for you. I know his first name is Richard. I got it here for you. Hold on a quick second. I'm going to strongly recommend that you sign up for this thing. It's a Vet. There we go. Just want to get his name correctly. And you can go, it's an award-winning blog about real estate law. A little bit to do. It's pretty heavy on the renting, leasing angle, but pretty much anything to do with real estate law, it's going to be covered. You're going to get it covered. So I'm a big fan of this, and I think you should sign up for the once a week email. And massrealestatelablog.com. Not the best title, but it is an award-winning blog about Massachusetts real estate law, and I think it's a great resource. So that concludes lesson 3 of your recorded education segment. Of course, I'm always here as your instructor in the background during the webinar, and just raise your hand using the webinar software if you'd like me to stop the recorded section and ask a question. More than happy to do that. You can also just type in your question at any time. I'm always here as your licensed instructor and owner of the real estate school. If I don't happen to be here, there is always a licensed instructor here, but on the other side of the webinar. So you're not out there alone, and we can always pause the video should you have any questions, comments, or concerns. Happy to take your questions at any time during the lesson, while the video is playing, or afterward as well. So again, I'm Jack Gately, owner of Jack Gately Real Estate and of the Real Estate School. You've been listening to lesson number 3 of our real estate curriculum, and thank you so much for doing so. Let's go to the live webinar and go over some of these concepts and further take your questions and give you some more examples. So we'll flip over to that, and if you're just watching the videos of these on YouTube, not a problem. Enjoy your lesson number 4. We'll see you over there soon enough. Thanks.